Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome in. Get comfortable wherever you happen to be listening from right now.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We are incredibly glad you're here with us today for this deep dive.
Yeah.
I was looking out the window this morning, just thinking about the sheer volume of information we're all expected to process every single day.
That's a lot.
It really is. We're living in this moment where the boundaries of what we know, the absolute fundamental truths about our ancient past, the hidden architecture of our own brains, the invisible lines of our technology, and certainly the geopolitical borders that hold our world together, they're all shifting underneath our feet.
Yeah.
It feels like the ground is just constantly moving.
It does, and it's completely valid if that feels overwhelming to you. There is this absolute fire hose of information coming at you, a constant barrage of noise from every screen. Our mission today is to sift through that chaos. We want to find the signal in the noise. We're taking a comprehensive analytical look at today's heavy global news, some really profound scientific breakthroughs, and the technological leaps that are reshaping society, just to help you make sense of the bigger picture.
That is exactly the goal. We want to take you on a journey today that spans the absolute extremes of our reality. We're going to start by looking up at the farthest reaches of the cosmos, and then we're going to bring it all the way back down to Earth.
Literally back down to Earth.
Literally. We will be looking at a 2,000-year-old footprint left in the mud in Scotland, United Kingdom. And throughout all of this, we are going to maintain a steady, journalistic, and highly objective eye on the urgent, history-making conflicts unfolding on the global stage right now.
Because today is Tuesday, March 3, 2026.
Right. And Donald Trump is the sitting U.S. president. The world is moving incredibly fast, and we have a lot to cover. Okay, let's unpack this.
I always find that a good place to start, particularly when the news on Earth feels heavy or chaotic, is to quite literally look up.
Yeah.
Space offers a perspective of scale that we desperately need. It reminds us of our place in things. And if you have any interest in skywatching, March 2026 is turning out to be a spectacular month. Tonight, for instance, on March 3, we are experiencing a total lunar eclipse.
Which is commonly referred to in the media as a blood moon.
Exactly.
I always see that term splashed across headlines, and it sounds so incredibly dramatic, like something out of a Gothic novel.
It does, yeah.
But the actual physics behind why the moon turns that specific color is fascinating. Can you break down what is actually happening up there?
Absolutely. The mechanics are relatively straightforward. The Earth is passing directly between the sun and the moon, casting its shadow.
Okay.
Now, intuitively, you might think that putting a massive rock like Earth in front of the light source would just make the moon go completely dark pitch black. But instead, it takes on this deep, eerie, reddish copper hue. And the culprit for that is our own atmosphere.
Because the light is bending around the Earth.
Precisely. As sunlight travels through the vacuum of space and hits Earth's atmosphere, the shorter wavelengths of light, so your blues and your greens, they get scattered away in every direction. This process, called Rayleigh scattering, is the exact same reason our daytime sky appears blue.
Right. Okay.
But the longer wavelengths, the reds and the oranges, they are able to pass through the thickness of the atmosphere. As they do, the atmosphere acts like a giant lens, bending or refracting those red wavelengths outward and projecting them deep into the Earth's shadow, right onto the surface of the moon.
Wow. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, when you look up at a blood moon tonight, you aren't just seeing a red rock. You're essentially looking at a projection of every single sunrise and sunset happening on Earth at that exact millisecond, all gathered up and cast onto the lunar surface at once.
That is precisely what it is. It's a collective reflection of Earth's dawn and dusk.
That's incredible.
And the cosmic optical illusions don't stop there. Just a few days from now, on March 8th, we are going to see a conjunction of Venus and Saturn. They'll appear in the western evening sky.
I saw a preview of this, and they look like they are practically colliding. They look like two headlights on the same car.
Right, and this is where the optical illusion of a conjunction is so humbling. To your eye, looking up from your backyard or your balcony, Venus and Saturn will look like they are right next to each other, perhaps even touching. But in reality, they're separated by nearly 1 billion miles of empty, freezing vacuum.
1 billion miles.
Yeah. It is a profound reminder of how our human brains are fundamentally incapable of perceiving true cosmic distance. We take the staggering, unfathomable depth of the entire solar system, and our brain compresses it into a flat, two-dimensional painting projected on the ceiling of the night sky.
It totally breaks your depth perception when you actually think about the math involved. Speaking of things happening in orbit, I was reading about some rather intense logistical operations happening aboard the ISS, the International Space Station.
Oh, yes, the HDVX-1.
Right. We have NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, coordinating right now to detach this cargo spacecraft, the HDV-X1.
Yeah, the HDV-X1 is a remarkable piece of engineering. It arrived at the ISS back in October of 2025, and it brought a massive payload, roughly 12,800 pounds of vital gear, scientific equipment, fresh food, and supplies for the crew.
Wow.
And it has been attached to the station, serving as an extended scientific platform for the last few months. But now, its primary mission is over.
And you can't exactly leave empty delivery trucks parked in low Earth orbit indefinitely. So what's the protocol here? Did they just send it drifting off into the void?
No, space debris is already a critical hazard. Instead, they are utilizing it for its secondary function. The crew is currently loading the HDV-X1 with several thousand pounds of accumulated station trash.
Okay.
Once it's packed, they will undock it and send it on a very specific calculated trajectory back toward Earth. As it hits the dense layers of the atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour, the friction will cause it to completely incinerate. It will burn up harmlessly over an ocean.
So it is essentially the most technologically advanced, multi-million-dollar garbage disposal system in the history of human civilization.
It really is, and it's entirely necessary when you have a permanent human presence living in a highly constrained environment in orbit. You have to manage the waste.
Makes sense.
But the ISS isn't just a place where we manage logistics. It is our premier observation deck for looking back at ourselves. Recently, they captured a breathtaking image over the Atlantic Ocean that perfectly illustrates a phenomenon known as sunglint.
I saw that photograph. It almost doesn't look like water. It looks like a sheet of hammered silver stretching across the curvature of the Earth. What causes that?
Sunglint is a fascinating optical phenomenon that occurs when sunlight reflects off the surface of the ocean at the exact same angle that a satellite sensor or camera on the ISS is viewing it. The ocean temporarily acts like a gigantic, flawless mirror, bouncing the sun's glare directly back into the lens.
Okay.
Now, scientifically, sunglint is a classic double-edged sword.
How so? I imagine if you were trying to study the water, a massive blinding glare isn't particularly helpful.
Exactly. If you're an oceanographer relying on satellite imagery to track the subtle color shifts of phytoplankton blooms, or if you're trying to gauge the ecological health of a coral reef system from space, sunglint is your worst enemy.
It just blinds the cameras.
Completely. It completely washes out the spectral data, it overexposes the image, and renders the underlying information useless.
But there's a flip side to this, right? I read that this same annoying glare is actually a crucial tool for environmental protection.
It is a miracle worker for detecting oil spills. And here is the physics behind why. Oil, whether it is leaking from a ruptured pipeline, a damaged tanker, or even just naturally seeping from the ocean floor, fundamentally changes the surface tension of the water.
Oh, I see.
It smooths out the microscopic choppy waves and ripples that normally scatter light. So when that patch of ocean is caught in a sunglint reflection, the smoothed oil slick reflects the light much more uniformly than the surrounding water.
So it basically lights up like a beacon?
Precisely. In a sunglint image, an oil slick will stand out with brilliant, high-contrast visibility, making it incredibly easy for authorities to detect, measure, and track the trajectory of the spill.
That is wild.
Something that ruins one scientist's data is the exact tool another scientist uses to prevent an ecological disaster.
It is entirely about your angle of perspective.
Yeah.
And our perspective of what is out there just keeps expanding. We're also seeing incredible deep space imagery coming from the collaboration between NASA and the ESA, the European Space Agency.
Right.
They have combined the capabilities of the legendary Hubble Space Telescope with the new Euclid spacecraft to capture these unprecedented multi-layered images of the Cat's Eye Nebula. But honestly, while the multi-billion-dollar telescope imagery is stunning, the space story that really stopped me in my tracks this week was about an exoplanet called WASP-P12b.
Yes. The discovery of WASP-12b is a milestone, not necessarily because of the planet itself, but because of who found it. This wasn't discovered by a team of 50 astrophysicists at a government-funded observatory. It was discovered by an amateur astronomer, a citizen scientist.
That is the part that blows my mind. You are telling me someone sitting in their backyard, maybe drinking a cup of coffee, managed to spot a planet orbiting a completely different star system. How is that even technologically possible for a private citizen?
It speaks to the exponential curve of technological accessibility. The astronomer used a highly advanced, privately owned telescope equipped with sensitive photometric sensors that simply weren't available to consumers a decade ago.
Okay.
They monitored a distant star and detected the minute fractional dimming of the star's light, which is called a transit event. This occurs when a planet passes directly in front of the star. They recorded the data, verified the light curve, and contributed to a major astronomical catalog.
Man, I struggle to get my home Wi-Fi to reach the kitchen, and people are out here confirming exoplanets on a Tuesday evening.
It's amazing.
It really does highlight how the tools of discovery are democratizing. But we don't always have to look billions of miles away to find something completely alien. Sometimes the most bizarre, paradigm-shifting discoveries are buried right beneath our feet.
That is a perfect transition, because the history of our own planet is far more alien than we often realize.
Let's bring things back down to Earth and dig into the sand. Specifically, we are looking at the Sahara Desert in Niger, Africa. A team of paleontologists has just unearthed the remains of a newly identified dinosaur, and they've given it a nickname that sounds like a mythological monster: the hell heron.
The hell heron. The formal scientific name is Spinosaurus mirabilis, and this is a monumental find in the field of paleontology. It is the first definitive identification of a brand new Spinosaurus species in over a century.
Wow.
We're talking about an apex predator that measured over 40 feet in length. But to truly understand the hell heron, you have to completely erase your current mental image of the Sahara Desert.
Right, because my mental image is sand dunes, blistering heat, and practically zero water. But 95 million years ago, this region of Niger, Africa, was a completely different world.
It was virtually unrecognizable. During the mid-Cretaceous period, northern Africa was a lush, vibrant, incredibly dense riverine environment.
Like a jungle.
A massive prehistoric wetland system intersecting with mangrove forests and deep, winding rivers. And this Spinosaurus didn't just live near the water, it evolved specifically to dominate it.
This is what fascinated me in the research. When we think of massive predatory dinosaurs, we naturally default to the T-Rex stomping around on dry land. But this creature went a completely different evolutionary route.
It did. While tyrannosaurs ruled the terrestrial ecosystems, the Spinosaurus adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle. It developed elongated, incredibly narrow jaws lined with conical interlocking teeth. Functionally, its skull operated very much like a modern heron or a crocodile, but scaled up to the size of a city bus.
A city bus.
Yeah. It would wade into these deep, ancient rivers, or perhaps even swim fully submerged, and use those specialized jaws to snatch massive, car-sized, prehistoric fish right out of the water.
I was looking at the artist renderings provided by the university, and it's a terrifying silhouette.
Mhm.
And it has this massive, curved, scimitar-shaped crest on the top of its skull. What purpose does something like that even serve? Is it a weapon?
Paleontologists largely believe that a crest of that shape and fragility wasn't used for physical combat. It was highly likely used for display, either for attracting mates, species recognition, or visually asserting dominance to rivals in the murky river environment.
Makes sense.
But what I find most compelling about the Spinosaurus mirabilis isn't just its anatomy, it's what its existence says about the impermanence of the Earth.
How so?
We are looking at the fossilized remains of a 40-foot river monster pulled from the dry, baking rock of the largest hot desert on the planet. It's a stark reminder that the Earth is a constantly shifting canvas. The environments we consider permanent, the Sahara, the Amazon, the ice caps, they are just temporary configurations. Given enough time, the Earth ruthlessly erases its own geography and rewrites it entirely.
That concept of the Earth erasing its own history brings us to a much more recent and incredibly fragile discovery. Let's move from the deep time of the Sahara to the modern coastline of Lunan Bay, located in Scotland, United Kingdom.
Yes.
Just recently, after a particularly brutal winter storm system battered the coast, a couple of locals were out walking their dogs on the beach. As they were walking, they noticed something strange in the exposed clay that the storm had stripped the sand away from. They had stumbled upon ancient footprints.
And not just any footprints. These were quickly identified by archaeologists as dating back to the Iron Age, roughly 2,000 years ago.
2,000 years.
Right. The storm had revealed a sequence of tracks belonging to both humans and livestock, likely cattle or sheep, perfectly preserved in the hardened estuarine clay.
This is where the story gets so tense. Archaeology is usually a slow, meticulous process. You brush away dirt millimeter by millimeter. But doing archaeology in a tidal zone is a race against the clock.
It is incredibly stressful. The very same storm surge that washed away the top layer of sand and revealed these 2,000-year-old tracks also meant that the incoming tides were unusually high and aggressive.
Oh, man.
The clock was ticking the second those prints were exposed to the air. Archaeologists had to scramble to the beach, battling freezing coastal winds, to rapidly photograph, measure, and take 3D photogrammetry scans of the footprints, because they knew with absolute certainty that the next high tide would sweep in and obliterate them forever.
It is so poignant. You have this literal snapshot in time. A person from the Iron Age, 2,000 years ago, just walking their animals along the Scottish coast. It sits hidden, protected under the sand for millennia. Then a storm hits, the curtain is pulled back for just a few frantic hours, and then the ocean steps in and deletes it permanently.
It's gone.
It reminds me of a recent study I saw out of Australia, specifically Kagari, which was formerly known as Fraser Island.
The Sand Island Lake study.
Yes. Researchers there discovered that these massive, deep, freshwater lakes on the world's largest sand island just completely dried up and vanished about 7,500 years ago. And they didn't vanish because of a catastrophic meteor or a massive tectonic event. They disappeared simply because the regional wind patterns shifted slightly, which rerouted the rainfall.
Right.
A slight adjustment in the wind, and entire ecosystems are erased. A single winter storm in Scotland, and 2,000 years of human history is exposed and then washed away.
If we connect this to the broader theme of today's deep dive, it is a humbling realization about how fragile our understanding of the world truly is. We are perpetually forced to work with incomplete data, trying to piece together the truth from the fragments that survive the wind and the tide.
Yeah.
And what is truly fascinating is that this fragility of knowledge applies just as much to the living, breathing biology of our planet today as it does to ancient fossils.
This is one of the most mind-bending concepts we're covering today. Let's pivot to a massive new biological analysis recently published in Science Daily. We generally assume that human beings have a pretty solid inventory of the animals we share this planet with, especially the vertebrates, the mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians.
Right.
We might miss a beetle in the rainforest, but we know the birds.
Mm-hmm.
However, this study suggests our inventory is wildly, fundamentally inaccurate.
It is. The study introduces a concept that is shaking the foundations of taxonomy, which is cryptic species. The researchers conducted a massive meta-analysis of genetic data, and their conservative estimate is staggering. They suggest that for every single known, categorized vertebrate species on Earth, there may be at least 2 more cryptic species hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight. How does an entirely unknown species of bird or lizard hide from modern science?
By looking exactly like something we already know. For centuries, biology relied heavily on morphology, categorizing animals based on their physical appearance, their bone structure, their feather patterns. If 2 frogs in a jungle look identical to the human eye, behave similarly, and have the same mating call, traditional science confidently categorizes them as the exact same species.
Right, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Exactly. But with the advent and widespread use of cheap, rapid DNA sequencing, we're realizing that our eyes have been lying to us. When geneticists sequence the DNA of these identical-looking frogs, they are finding that their genetic codes are vastly different. These creatures may have visually converged to look the same because they live in similar environments, but genetically, their evolutionary family trees split millions of years ago.
So they can't even interbreed.
No, they cannot interbreed. They are entirely distinct branches of life, disguised in the same uniform.
I want to make sure I'm grasping the real-world implications of this. From a purely academic standpoint, it's fascinating that there are 3 types of identical frogs instead of 1. But beyond the textbooks, what does this actually mean for us? Why does this matter on a practical level?
It is a matter of absolute urgency for global conservation efforts. Think about how we allocate environmental resources. Imagine there is a specific type of bat that we consider to be incredibly common. We see them everywhere. Because we believe their population is in the tens of millions, We don't prioritize protecting their habitat. We allow logging or development in their territories.
Because we assume they are fine.
Correct. But what if DNA sequencing suddenly reveals that our common bat is actually an umbrella for 4 distinct cryptic species? Suddenly the math changes. Maybe 3 of those species are doing fine, but the 4th species only exists in one tiny specific microclimate that is currently being bulldozed for a shopping mall.
Oh, wow.
If we don't know they're genetically unique, we will unknowingly allow an entire million-year-old lineage of life to be driven to extinction simply because we mistook them for a common pigeon.
We are literally judging the book of life by its cover, and we're losing entire chapters before we even learn how to read them.
That's a great way to put it.
It makes you wonder how much unfathomable complexity is operating right in front of us that we simply lack the tools to perceive. And honestly, that is the perfect bridge to our next topic. Because if we want to talk about unfathomable complexity hiding in plain sight, we have to talk about the human brain.
The ultimate black box.
Exactly. We are making strides, though. A major new study out of the University of Notre Dame is fundamentally challenging how we understand human intelligence and brain function. For the better part of a century, neuroscience has leaned heavily on a modular view of the brain.
Yes.
That's the idea that the brain is like a highly specialized factory, right?
Yeah.
This specific lobe handles language processing. This cortex handles motor control. This tiny cluster handles memory.
Yes, the localization of function. And while certain regions are certainly specialized, the Notre Dame researchers are advocating for the network neuroscience theory. This theory flips the modular view on its head.
Okay.
They argue that higher-level human intelligence, our ability to reason, problem solve, and adapt, does not reside in any one smart region of the brain. Instead, intelligence is an emergent property.
Meaning it only exists when the parts work together.
Precisely. It emerges from the entire brain operating dynamically as one massive, constantly shifting, interconnected network. It is not about how powerful a single brain region is. It is about the efficiency, the speed, and the flexibility of the neural circuits communicating across different regions.
That's fascinating.
Intelligence is a collective whole brain process. It explains why our consciousness feels like a single unified experience, rather than a collection of separate apps running in the background.
It paints a picture of the brain as this beautiful, synchronized symphony, rather than a collection of isolated soloists. And as our understanding of this intricate neural network deepens, our ability to interface with it, to fix it when it breaks, is leading to medical interventions that genuinely sound like science fiction. Let's look at the new developments with wireless retinal implants.
This is one of the most profound medical breakthroughs we've seen in recent years. We are looking at a paradigm shift in treating severe AMD, which is age-related macular degeneration. This is a condition where the photoreceptors in the center of the retina degrade and die, leading to irreversible central blindness.
Right.
Historically, once those cells were gone, the vision loss was considered permanent.
But the new approach completely bypasses the dead cells. I was looking at the schematics for this device, and the scale of it is hard to comprehend. It is a 2 by 2 millimeter implant.
It is microscopic.
Yeah.
And crucially, it is entirely wireless. Earlier iterations of visual prosthetics required cumbersome wiring that penetrated the eye, which carried high risks of infection and surgical complications. This 2 by 2 millimeter chip is surgically implanted directly onto the retina.
And how did it work?
It operates by capturing incoming light and utilizing microscopic photovoltaic cells to convert that light into tiny electrical pulses.
So it is acting exactly like the missing photoreceptors. But how does that signal get to the brain?
That is the genius of it. The implant projects those electrical pulses directly into the surviving retinal neurons that sit just behind the damaged area. It essentially bridges the gap. The electrical signal stimulates the healthy neural pathways, which then travel down the optic nerve to the visual cortex.
Amazing.
The brain receives these electrical signals and, utilizing that dynamic network we just discussed, successfully translates them back into a visual image.
The data from the international clinical trials is what really caught my attention. It isn't just a theoretical success.
Yeah.
Over 80% of the patients in the trial demonstrated a restoration of meaningful central vision.
Yes.
We're talking about individuals who have been legally blind for years, unable to see faces or read text, who are now able to read letters in small print again. We're building microscopic wireless bridges over damaged biology to give human beings their sight back.
It proves that if the underlying neural highway is still intact, we can build a synthetic on-ramp to restore lost function. It is a triumph of modern medicine.
It really is.
However, we have to look at the whole picture of medical advancement. Because as we celebrate these miraculous interventions, we are also beginning to understand the long-term, delayed biological tolls of our other life-saving treatments.
You're referring to the new, highly sobering data regarding childhood cancer survivors. This is a heavy topic, but an incredibly vital one to understand.
It is.
The good news, the incredible news, is that modern medicine has become exceptionally proficient at curing pediatric cancers. Survival rates have skyrocketed over the last few decades. But we're now entering an era where we have a large population of long-term survivors, and we're seeing the delayed bill come due for those intense treatments.
The clinical studies are revealing a very harsh reality. Young survivors who underwent heavy regimens of chemotherapy and radiation are exhibiting signs of accelerated biological aging. At a cellular level, they are significantly older than their chronological age.
Why does that happen?
The mechanism here is that chemotherapy is designed to indiscriminately attack rapidly dividing cells. That is how it destroys tumors. But it causes immense collateral damage to healthy tissue, particularly within the central nervous system.
What specific damage are the researchers seeing in the brain?
They're documenting both structural and functional degradation in vital neural pathways. Specifically, they are seeing a marked reduction in neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons within the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the absolute critical center for learning, memory formation, and emotional regulation.
And the tragic downstream effect of that damage is that many of these childhood cancer survivors, now in their 30s and 40s, are facing early onset dementia and severe cognitive decline decades earlier than the general population.
Exactly.
They won the battle against the cancer, but the weapons we used to save them left a ticking biological clock in their neural networks.
It's a devastating trade-off. However, the research does provide a beacon of hope, and it ties right back to the network neuroscience theory. Because the brain's networks are highly plastic and adaptable, studies are demonstrating that aggressive, tailored lifestyle interventions can significantly mitigate these adverse effects.
What kind of interventions are proving effective?
Structured, rigorous physical exercise protocols combined with intense intellectual stimulation and cognitive behavioral therapies. These therapies actually encourage the brain to build new alternative neural pathways around the damaged areas.
That's incredible.
It highlights a necessary evolution in oncology. The mission cannot end when the tumor is gone. The medical community must invest heavily in long-term neurocognitive rehabilitation to ensure that these survivors actually get to experience the full, vibrant lives that we saved them for.
It's a profound responsibility. We are investing billions of dollars in countless hours trying to heal the human brain, to protect its networks, and to restore its functions. But at the exact same time, humanity is investing trillions of dollars into artificial intelligence, desperately trying to artificially replicate the human brain. And that endeavor is turning into a very wobbly, very high-stakes tightrope walk. Let's shift our focus to the AI frontier.
It's an unavoidable topic because AI is rapidly infiltrating the most sensitive areas of human experience. Let's examine the phenomenon of AI acting as a therapist.
Okay.
Driven by a massive global demand for mental health support and a severe shortage of affordable human therapists, AI chatbots are stepping into the void. But a comprehensive new study out of Brown University has exposed some severe ethical and clinical risks associated with this.
I want to frame this carefully because I can absolutely see the appeal. Let's look at the reality of the healthcare system. Therapy is prohibitively expensive. It's frequently not covered by insurance, and wait lists can be months long.
That's true.
If someone is experiencing a mental health crisis at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, and they cannot afford a $150 an hour professional, an AI chatbot on their phone is immediately accessible, free, and willing to listen. Isn't a generic AI response in the middle of the night better than absolute isolation and silence? Aren't the researchers letting perfect be the enemy of the good?
That is the primary defense of the technology, and the accessibility argument is undeniably powerful. But the Brown University researchers evaluated these models against the standards of trained clinical psychologists, and they documented 15 distinct severe ethical breaches. The core danger lies in the illusion of comprehension.
What do you mean by the illusion of comprehension?
When you text an AI about your trauma, it responds with language that sounds empathetic, structured, and clinically sound. But it does not understand your pain. It is a large language model predicting the next most statistically likely word in a sequence based on its training data.
It's just math.
Exactly. In a high-stakes crisis situation, a generic algorithmic response can be actively hazardous. Furthermore, these models are trained on the open internet, which means they can inadvertently regurgitate harmful biases, reinforce stigmas, or offer culturally incompetent advice. Relying on predictive text for severe emotional trauma is a massive clinical gamble.
It's the ultimate modern paradox.
Right.
It is universally accessible, yet potentially clinically toxic. And while academics and ethicists debate the role of AI in healthcare, the corporate world has entirely bypassed the debate. The corporate mandate is clear: integrate AI everywhere, immediately, to optimize efficiency and slash costs.
Look at the sheer velocity of the corporate AI integration. Take the startup 14.ai as a prime example. Founded by a married duo in the US, they have developed an AI system specifically engineered to entirely replace human customer support teams.
Replace them entirely.
Yes. They state that their algorithm can understand complex customer intent and situational context well enough to resolve 80% of incoming queries with absolutely zero human intervention. For the companies integrating this software, it translates to an overnight 50% reduction in operational customer support costs.
And it isn't just entry-level customer service jobs that are being automated. Let's look at the software developers themselves. Look at the coding tool Cursor. It just recently hit a staggering $2 billion in annualized revenue.
$2 billion?
Yeah. Cursor allows software developers to build and edit complex code bases using simple natural language prompts. You just tell the AI what you want the software to do, and it writes the code. It makes a single developer exponentially faster.
Right.
And to fuel all of this, Stripe, the global payment processing giant, just launched a dedicated feature to help AI companies precisely track their massive server compute costs and pass those microtransaction fees directly onto the end user. They are turning the astronomical cost of running AI into a streamlined profit center.
What we are witnessing is the most aggressive corporate push for efficiency since the Industrial Revolution. But the silent, inevitable consequence of this hyper-efficiency is the massive displacement of the human workforce.
Yeah.
The economic equation is brutal. If an AI can resolve 80% of customer complaints, and an AI coding tool allows one developer to do the work of 3, a corporation simply requires fewer human beings to operate. The founders of companies like 14.ai frequently argue that AI will just enhance human capabilities, freeing up staff to tackle more creative, strategic initiatives.
But if we look at the historical track record of corporate behavior, that optimism feels a bit hollow. When a major corporation suddenly saves 50% on their customer service budget, they rarely take those millions of dollars and reinvest them into retraining their staff for creative roles.
No, they don't.
They take those savings and return that value directly to their shareholders in the form of dividends and stock buybacks.
Yeah.
We are watching the real-time, silent hollowing out of the white-collar workforce.
The economic disruption is undeniable. But as disruptive as AI is in the corporate boardroom, the stakes become existentially terrifying when AI enters the military theater. Let's navigate the deeply complex moral maze of militarized AI.
This is a story with incredibly high stakes and shifting alliances. It begins with the U.S. Department of Defense, the DoD.
Yes.
Recently, the DoD officially labeled the prominent AI company Anthropic as a supply chain risk. Now, for context, Anthropic built its entire brand reputation on safety. They are famous for their constitutional AI models that are hard-coded with strict ethical guardrails designed specifically to prevent the AI from generating harmful, illegal, or dangerous instructions.
Right.
Because the DoD slapped them with this risk label, the U.S. State Department was abruptly forced to stop using Anthropic's Claude AI for their internal workflows and switch their contracts over to OpenAI's ChatGPT.
But the narrative has a massive controversial twist. According to a deeply sourced report from TechCrunch, the company dedicated to AI safety wasn't just building harmless chatbots. Anthropic actually submitted a formal proposal to the Pentagon, pitching the use of their Claude AI system to coordinate U.S. military drone swarms as part of a $100 million defense challenge.
Wait, so the company whose core marketing pitch is, "We won't let our AI help you build a bomb," was simultaneously pitching the Pentagon on using their technology to fly autonomous military drones.
That is the contradiction that sparked an immediate massive industry backlash. Initially, a large coalition of tech workers signed an open letter protesting the DoD's decision to label Anthropic a risk. They urged diplomatic dialogue over punitive measures that stifle innovation.
Yeah.
But when the general public realized the full scope of what was happening, that the DoD was heavily integrating OpenAI into its infrastructure, and that Anthropic was pitching drone coordination tech, the user base revolted.
The metrics on the public fallout are staggering. In the wake of this news, OpenAI's ChatGPT experienced a 295% surge in app uninstalls.
Wow.
They were hit with a 775% spike in one-star reviews. Users were furious, flooding social media and app stores with statements explicitly saying they were canceling their premium subscriptions because they refused to fund a company that is training a war machine.
And the other side of that.
Meanwhile, users who fled ChatGPT rushed to download Anthropic's Claude app as an alternative. But the sudden influx of traffic was so overwhelming that Claude's servers crashed and the entire system went offline twice in 24 hours.
This incident perfectly highlights the deep, almost unbridgeable ideological schism regarding the future of AI. It's essential to look at both sides of this divide neutrally to understand the stakes.
Let's break those perspectives down.
On one side, you have a predominantly left-leaning perspective, championed heavily by Silicon Valley tech workers, privacy advocates, and civil liberties organizations. Their stance is that AI must be bound by strict, unbreachable ethical boundaries.
Right.
They argue that integrating black box AI algorithms into the military-industrial complex is a slippery slope toward unchecked mass surveillance, the violation of global civil liberties, and the ultimate nightmare scenario, autonomous lethal weapons. Killing machines operating on battlefields without human conscience or accountability.
They view the militarization of AI as a fundamental threat to human rights.
Exactly. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was forced into aggressive damage control, publicly promising that their technology would not be used to spy on American citizens. But for many advocates, the trust is already permanently fractured.
But then you have to examine the right-leaning national security perspective. When you speak to defense experts, Pentagon officials, and military strategists, their argument is entirely pragmatic. They view artificial intelligence as the defining strategic advantage of the 21st century, essentially the new nuclear deterrent.
A new arms race.
Their argument is straightforward. If the United States and its democratic allies artificially kneecap their own AI development out of ethical hand-wringing, adversarial nations will not hesitate to fill that vacuum. They argue that hostile states who do not share Western ethical constraints are already aggressively developing AI-driven drone swarms and autonomous targeting systems.
That's a strong point.
From this security standpoint, failing to rapidly militarize and integrate AI puts the free world at an immense existential disadvantage.
It is the defining technological Cold War of our era. The central, agonizing question is, how do you balance the moral imperative to prevent the creation of autonomous killing machines with the strategic imperative to ensure your society isn't destroyed by a geopolitical rival who decided to build them anyway?
It's a chilling, perhaps unsolvable equation. And while the tech world debates the theoretical ethics of future AI wars in comfortable boardrooms, the devastating, visceral reality of human conflict is playing out on the ground right now. We must transition our focus to the Middle East, where the geopolitical escalation over the last 72 hours has moved faster and more violently than almost any analyst predicted.
We must approach this segment with deep journalistic integrity and absolute neutrality, focusing strictly on the confirmed facts on the ground, because the situation is highly complex and intensely volatile. Over the past few days, the United States and Israel have engaged in a massive, coordinated multi-day military campaign targeting Iranian assets and leadership.
The scale of the strikes is unprecedented in recent history. Airstrikes have penetrated deep into sovereign territory. In Tehran, Iran, munitions struck the presidential complex and a key Security Council building. Simultaneous strikes were also carried out, targeting militant infrastructure in Beirut, Lebanon. But the most globally destabilizing development is the confirmed assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, alongside his wife in a targeted strike. U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the nation shortly after the news broke. He described the military operation as a deliberate decapitation strategy.
Decapitation strategy.
He stated that this aggressive action was the last, best chance to permanently halt Iran's nuclear development program and dismantle what he characterized as a thick and sinister regime. Crucially, the president indicated that this military operation could extend for 4 to 5 weeks, and he explicitly did not rule out the deployment of U.S. ground troops.
The retaliation from the Iranian military apparatus was immediate and expansive. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, launched massive barrages of ballistic missiles and suicide drones. These retaliatory strikes targeted military installations within Israel, U.S. military bases stationed across the Persian Gulf, and in a significant escalation, they directly struck the U.S. Embassy compound located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A drone impacted the embassy grounds, sparking a severe fire, though the full extent of the structural damage is still being assessed.
The human cost, the civilian toll of this rapid escalation, is staggering. Initial reports from human rights organizations and local authorities indicate that at least 787 civilians have been killed in Iran over the last few days of bombardment.
787.
The U.S. military has officially confirmed the deaths of 6 American service members in the retaliatory strikes. And amidst the chaos, tragically, a primary school was hit during the bombing runs. UNESCO immediately issued a statement strongly condemning the strike on the school, categorizing it as a grave and unacceptable violation of international humanitarian law.
Beyond the immediate tragic loss of life, military analysts are closely observing the chilling evolution of modern warfare tactics utilized in this campaign. The Financial Times published a report detailing how Israeli intelligence operatives managed to execute the strike on Ayatollah Khamenei.
How did they do it?
They reportedly hacked into Tehran's municipal traffic camera network and compromised local mobile phone networks, using the city's own civilian infrastructure to precisely track the supreme leader's movements prior to launching the munition. It demonstrates how deeply integrated cyber warfare is with kinetic strikes.
And then there's the stark, terrifying economic reality of this conflict. A piece in the South China Morning Post highlighted the incredible, arguably unsustainable financial disparity of modern asymmetric warfare. Iran is currently deploying mass swarms of Shahed drones. These drones are relatively rudimentary and cost roughly $20,000 each to manufacture.
Okay.
To defend against them, to shoot them out of the sky before they hit their targets, the U.S. and Israel are firing advanced interceptor missiles that cost upwards of $4 million for a single launch.
That math is brutal.
President Trump has publicly stated that the U.S. possesses virtually unlimited munitions. But defense economists are deeply concerned about the prospect of a prolonged war of attrition. You cannot indefinitely sustain a financial burn rate where your defensive shield costs 200 times more than your enemy's offensive spear.
And that financial strain is violently bleeding into the global economy. In response to the strikes, Iran announced the immediate closure of the Strait of Hormuz, threatening to target and burn any commercial shipping vessels attempting to pass through.
The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most vital choke point for the global energy supply.
It is. Consequently, the global energy markets panicked. The price of crude oil immediately surged past $79.40 a barrel. Marine insurance premiums for oil tankers operating in the region hit a 6-year high,
Which hits everything.
Wall Street reacted with massive volatility. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted between 800 and 900 points in a single trading session as bond yields spiked and investors braced for the inflationary impact of a prolonged regional war.
The ripple effects are paralyzing global infrastructure. The international travel and logistics sectors are in absolute chaos. Aviation authorities are calling this the most severe disruption to global air travel since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands of commercial flights have been abruptly canceled.
It's essentially a no-fly zone.
The airspace over the Middle East has effectively become a no-fly zone. To give you a granular sense of how this impacts people globally, the West Indies and Zimbabwe national cricket teams, who just finished competing in the T20 World Cup, are currently stranded in their hotels in Kolkata, India. Their connecting flights home through the major hubs in Dubai have been completely grounded.
Wow.
We did see reports of one Etihad Airways flight managing to depart from Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, and land safely in Delhi, India. But passengers on board described the harrowing experience of flying under what they called tense skies, highly aware of the military activity below them.
The diplomatic fallout is matching the economic chaos. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 do not travel advisory, urging all American citizens to leave the Middle East immediately. They are actively pulling non-emergency diplomatic personnel from U.S. embassies in Bahrain, Jordan, and Iraq. The international community is deeply fractured, scrambling to respond to the sudden vacuum of power and the escalating violence.
It's crucial we look at the different political perspectives regarding the U.S. and Israeli strategy here to understand the domestic and international debate.
From a right-leaning and hawkish national security perspective, staunch supporters of President Trump's military strike argue that it was a bold, long overdue, and absolutely necessary action. They view the Iranian regime as the primary state sponsor of terrorism globally and a fundamentally destabilizing force in the region.
Right.
Their core argument is that striking decisively establishes strong, undeniable deterrence. Furthermore, they believe kinetic action is the only reliable method to physically prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, a scenario they view as an existential threat, not just to Israel, but to the entire Western world.
Conversely, from a left-leaning, anti-interventionist and international law perspective, vocal critics argue that this military action is dangerously reckless. Figures like former UK Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, alongside various international legal scholars, have vehemently condemned the preemptive strikes, arguing they constitute a flagrant violation of international law and sovereign borders.
And their main concern.
Their primary strategic concern is the apparent lack of a comprehensive day-after plan. They argue that executing a decapitation strategy without a robust, actionable stabilization plan won't usher in peace. Rather, it will ignite endless, chaotic regional factionalism, radicalize entirely new generations against the West, and heavily risk dragging the United States into another bloody, multi-decade quagmire in the Middle East.
We're also seeing the European alliance openly split on how to manage the fallout. Spain took a remarkably hard line, publicly barring the United States from utilizing the Rota and Moron military bases in southern Spain to launch, refuel, or support any aircraft involved in the Iranian strike operations.
That's a major statement.
It is. Meanwhile, Germany is treading very cautiously, issuing measured statements. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer publicly defended Britain's initial distance from the direct military strikes, stating firmly that his primary duty is to judge what actions are strictly in Britain's national interest, rather than blindly following Allied momentum.
And the major global superpowers are aggressively positioning themselves on the geopolitical chessboard. Russia has immediately offered to step in and mediate the conflict, clearly attempting to leverage the chaos to assert itself as the primary regional peacemaker and power broker.
What about China?
China has publicly condemned the military strikes, largely driven by their heavy reliance on imported Iranian oil to fuel their economy. However, behind the scenes, diplomatic sources suggest Beijing is desperately trying to thread the needle, condemning the violence while simultaneously trying to protect its fragile, newly established economic detente with the U.S., particularly ahead of a highly anticipated upcoming summit between President Trump and President Xi Jinping.
What is absolutely essential for anyone listening to understand is how deeply, inextricably interconnected our modern world is. A targeted drone strike in Tehran immediately leads to the closure of a strait thousands of miles away, which spikes the price of gas at your local station, which crashes your retirement portfolio on the Dow Jones, which strands international athletes in a hotel in India, and forces European nations to fundamentally reposition their military alliances overnight. Geopolitics is no longer an abstract concept that happens over there.
It's everywhere. It dictates the terms of our daily reality. But while these massive, earth-shattering global crises rightfully dominate the front pages and demand our attention, they often act as a smokescreen. They obscure the quiet, subtle, yet profound ways our daily lives, our personal privacy, and our culture are being eroded by corporate interests. Let's pivot away from the battlefield and look at the business and technology sector, specifically focusing on the erosion of privacy under the radar.
There is a fascinating grassroots pushback happening right now against what we call ambient surveillance. A Swiss sociologist named Yves Jean Renaud recently developed and launched an app called Nearby Glasses.
Interesting name.
Yeah, the app utilizes your smartphone's Bluetooth capabilities to constantly scan your immediate vicinity. If it detects the specific Bluetooth signature emitted by Meta smart glasses or similar wearable recording devices, it sends an immediate alert to your phone.
It feels incredibly dystopian to even need an app like that, but it is entirely necessary. The anxiety of constant invisible surveillance in public spaces is a very modern, very real psychological burden. You sit on the subway or at a cafe, and anyone looking in your direction could be silently recording high-definition video of you, instantly analyzing your face with AI, or live streaming your conversation.
It's unsettling.
This app feels like a desperate grassroots attempt by citizens to reclaim just a tiny fraction of consent in the public square. And this anxiety about corporate surveillance ties perfectly into the broader, often callous disregard tech giants have for the individual. Look at the ongoing litigation against Meta. Lawyers are currently arguing in court, presenting internal documents that Meta actively and aggressively tracked teenage user data on Instagram.
Right.
The lawsuits allege they intentionally tweaked their proprietary algorithms to ruthlessly maximize engagement and screen time, fully aware of the devastating, measurable cost those algorithms were having on youth mental health.
It is the ultimate prioritization of algorithmic efficiency and corporate profit over human connection, privacy, or psychological well-being. And we are seeing this exact same philosophy, the prioritization of the corporate monolith over the individual, in the relentless trend of media consolidation.
Like the streaming wars.
Yes. It was just officially announced that Warner Bros. Discovery, or WBD, is executing a massive merger combining HBO Max and Paramount Plus into one colossal mega streaming service.
Great. That means my television is going to demand yet another app update, and I will have to figure out a new subscription tier just to watch a movie.
Exactly.
But on a macro level, it's a staggering consolidation of media power. Financial analysts value the combined entity at around $110 billion. The corporate strategy is obvious. They are merging to create a war chest large enough to directly fight Netflix for dominance. But what does this actually mean for the consumer?
It means fewer choices, significantly less market competition, and the reality that massive, vital libraries of human culture, film, and television are now controlled by an ever-shrinking handful of executives.
And we are seeing that exact same strategy of corporate consolidation actively squeezing out unique, independent culture in entirely different industries. Take the beverage sector. Tilray, which is a massive U.S.-based cannabis and beverage conglomerate, just purchased the renowned Scottish craft brewer BrewDog for £33 million.
BrewDog was an institution. They were the absolute poster child for indie, punk rock, anti-establishment craft brewing. They built their entire brand identity on being the anti-corporate alternative.
They did. And how did the new corporate owners handle the transition of this beloved indie brand? Within days of the acquisition, they fired hundreds of BrewDog staff members in a brutal, highly sanitized 15-minute mass phone call. Whether we're analyzing the consolidation of streaming content, the manipulative design of social media algorithms, or the aggressive buyout of a craft beer company, the underlying theme is identical. Massive conglomerates are relentlessly squeezing the market. The human element, whether that is unique corporate culture, employee welfare, or the mental health of a teenage user, is increasingly viewed on a spreadsheet not as a value, but as an operational inefficiency that must be optimized out of existence to satisfy shareholders.
It can feel incredibly bleak when you lay it all out like that. We've spent the last hour talking about ancient footprints being washed away by the tide, the tragic delayed tolls of childhood cancer, the terrifying implications of AI warfare, the devastating reality of global conflict and civilian casualties, and the relentless creep of corporate greed.
It's heavy.
But at the beginning of this deep dive, we made a promise. We promised to find the signal in the noise. And sometimes the most important signal is just a quiet, enduring reminder of human resilience and creativity. So let's look at a few brief glimmers of humanity before we wrap up our time together.
That's a good idea.
There is a truly wonderful story emerging from the art world this week. A long-lost painting by the legendary Dutch master Rembrandt, a portrait painted in the year 1633, has just been miraculously rediscovered. It had completely vanished from public knowledge and academic records after being sold to a private collector in 1961.
I absolutely love stories like this. It's a profound reminder that beauty possesses a stubborn endurance. Think about all the chaos that has transpired over the last 60 years. We went through the height of the Cold War, the dawn of the internet, massive social upheavals, a global pandemic, and countless localized conflicts. And through all of that noise, this masterpiece was just sitting quietly in a room somewhere, surviving, waiting to be found and appreciated again by an entirely new generation.
And we see that same stubborn endurance, that capacity to survive and create in people as well. There was a beautiful profile published this week highlighting a Syrian refugee chef currently living in London, United Kingdom.
I read about him.
Years ago, he was forced to flee the horrific, devastating civil war in Syria. He arrived in the UK with absolutely nothing, no money, no connections, just his skills and his culture. And over the years, he has built a massive, highly celebrated culinary success story. He opened a restaurant that has become far more than just a place serving incredible traditional Syrian food. It has evolved into a vital hub for community integration.
He hires other refugees, right?
He does. He actively employs other newly arrived refugees, helping them find their footing, and uses his food to share his culture with his new home.
Food and art. When you strip everything else away, they really are the ultimate antidotes to a chaotic, destructive world, aren't they? They remind us of what human beings are actually capable of creating when we redirect our energy away from conflict and destruction.
They remind us of our shared humanity. And that shared humanity is precisely what gets drowned out in the overwhelming noise of corporate algorithms, geopolitical posturing, and the endless cycle of airstrikes.
Okay, we have covered an immense, truly staggering amount of ground today. Let's take a breath and do a rapid-fire recap of the journey we just took. We started by looking up at the Blood Moon and the Cat's Eye Nebula, humbling ourselves with our tiny, fragile place in the cosmos. We dug deep into the ancient sands of Niger, Africa, to uncover the 40-foot hell heron, and we watched, helpless, as 2,000-year-old footprints washed away into the sea in Scotland, United Kingdom.
Quite a trip.
We explored the fascinating reality that our brains operate as dynamic networks rather than isolated machines, and marveled at microscopic wireless implants curing blindness. We debated the highly treacherous ethical tightrope of relying on AI for our mental health and the silent economic displacement of human workers. We navigated the terrifying moral maze of Anthropic, OpenAI, and the Pentagon's push for AI drone swarms.
We covered a lot of heavy ground.
We did. We provided a comprehensive, unvarnished look at the escalating war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, detailing the devastating civilian toll, the $79 barrel of oil, the crippled travel industry, and the fractured state of global diplomacy. And finally, we examined how corporate consolidation is quietly squeezing our privacy and our culture, but managed to find lasting hope in a rediscovered Rembrandt masterpiece and a remarkably resilient Syrian chef in London, United Kingdom.
And as we close, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Early in this deep dive, we discussed the biological concept of cryptic species, animals that are hiding in plain sight, looking identical to everything around them, but secretly holding entirely different, unique DNA.
Right.
I want you to look at the modern human world we just spent the last hour dissecting. Look at the AI interfaces on your phone that mimic empathy. Look at the massive corporate mergers claiming to improve your experience. Look at the geopolitical maneuvers of nations claiming they are fighting solely for peace and stability. How much of our modern human world is entirely cryptic?
That's a good question.
How many complex systems, technological platforms, and political motives are hiding in plain sight, projecting one safe, familiar reality to us, while patiently waiting for us to sequence their true DNA?
That is an incredibly profound, slightly unsettling question to end on. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this deep dive today. We know your time is valuable. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking closely for the signal in the noise, and we will see you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are undertaking a comprehensive analysis of a truly planetary event, one that is fundamentally restructuring the global order as we speak. We are looking at the sweeping geopolitical, diplomatic, and economic implications of the recent United States and Israeli military strikes against Iran.
Right.
This military campaign, which is officially dubbed Operation Epic Fury, resulted in the assassination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and it has sent shockwaves far, far beyond the borders of the Middle East. We really must explicitly frame this from the outset. This is not a localized skirmish. We are analyzing a seismic, planetary shift here.
Absolutely.
Drawing upon the global source payload provided for this discussion, we are going to examine the ripple effects radiating out to Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, instantly altering the calculus of global markets and international diplomacy. Now, I will argue that this decisive, albeit aggressive military intervention serves as a necessary strategic correction to dismantle severe nuclear threats and ultimately to stabilize the global economic and security order.
And I will argue that this unilateral escalation is a catastrophic miscalculation, one that critically fractures international law, alienates the global south, and triggers severe planetary economic shocks, all while, ironically, accelerating the very nuclear proliferation it claims to prevent.
Let us begin by framing the strategic reality of this intervention. For decades, the global system has really struggled to function efficiently with a regime that consistently threatens vital maritime waterways and actively pursues nuclear armament. From a framework of strategic realism, the status quo was just entirely unsustainable for the planet. Yes, we are currently witnessing short-term market volatility. I mean, The Dow Jones dropping 800 to 900 points in a single session is a stark metric of immediate anxiety among investors. I concede that. However, this disruption is the necessary, unavoidable cost for long-term planetary stability. Proponents of the strike have articulated that Operation Epic Fury represents the last best chance to permanently eliminate Iran's missile capabilities and its naval threats in the region.
But at what cost?
What is crucial to recognize is the underlying resilience of global commerce. Even amidst the fog of this war, the economic superpowers are adapting. The United States and China, for instance, are actively continuing a trade détente. They are exploring reciprocal intellectual property-light investments and joint ventures ahead of an upcoming presidential summit. The foundational pillars of the global economy are weathering this storm because the market understands that excising a chronic geopolitical threat ultimately secures the future of global trade for everyone.
I come at it from a very different way, grounding my analysis in a multipolar and diplomatic framework. From that vantage point, the systemic damage being inflicted right now is profound and, frankly, perhaps irreversible. These strikes have dangerously bypassed international consensus, effectively isolating the United States and Israel on the global stage.
Isolating is a strong word.
But an accurate one. We are not just looking at temporary market jitters in Western capitals. We are witnessing immediate planetary economic fallout. Brent crude surged 15% almost overnight. European natural gas futures jumped 30%. Qatar Energy, which is an absolute linchpin in global energy logistics, has completely halted its liquefied natural gas production following the escalation.
Right, as a temporary precaution.
A precaution that is a severe disruption of the global supply chain, impacting everyone from manufacturers in Germany to consumers in Southeast Asia. Furthermore, the geopolitical backlash from the global south is unprecedented. We are seeing unified condemnations from the African Union and ICAO. In Latin America, indigenous groups like Ecuador's CANAI have strongly condemned the military escalation, citing the grave implications for regional stability and economic survival in developing nations that simply cannot absorb these fuel shocks. Even traditional Western allies are pulling away. The intervention is not stabilizing the global order. It is fracturing it along fault lines we may not be able to repair.
Your point on the planetary economic shockwaves is the logical place to ground our first core area of contention. We clearly differ on how to interpret these market signals. Let us look closely at the resilience of the global market versus the fragility you are describing.
The fragility is not theoretical. It is playing out in real time across the global supply chain. Just consider the immediate airspace closures over major logistical hubs like Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We are looking at the terrifying prospect of the Strait of Hormuz, literally the most critical maritime choke point for global energy, being blocked or rendered unnavigable. But beyond the logistics, look at the sheer unsustainability of the asymmetric economic warfare currently underway. The United States is firing interceptor missiles that cost $4 million each.
Right.
$4 million each. To shoot down Iranian Shahed drones that cost $20,000 to manufacture. That financial asymmetry drains planetary defense resources at an alarming rate. When you combine that attritional cost with the disruption of Qatari LNG and the massive sell-offs in Asian and American equities, it does not signal a temporary birth pang of a new order. It signals the precipice of a broader global recession triggered by a conflict that has no clearly defined off-ramp. How can developing economies survive a prolonged 15% spike in crude oil when their debt burdens are already at historic highs?
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Markets, by their very nature, are designed to price in short-term geopolitical shocks. The initial drop in the Dow and the spike in Brent crude are algorithmic and psychological reflexes. They are not permanent structural failures of the global economy. What we must focus on is the macroeconomic adaptation occurring simultaneously.
Adaptation?
Yes, look at the specific evidence regarding Beijing and Washington that we highlighted earlier. China imports roughly 90% of Iran's oil. By all conventional logic, this strike should have ruptured U.S.-China relations entirely. Yet the current trade détente is surviving this exact crisis. Washington and Beijing are actively discussing joint ventures to minimize regulatory and political risks, carefully structuring these as intellectual property-light models. If the global economy were truly entering a terminal recession, the two largest economies on Earth would not be planning robust, forward-looking economic integration.
That assumes a lot about their long-term intentions, though.
It assumes they are rational actors protecting their interests. Furthermore, securing the Middle East militarily, dismantling the proxy networks, and securing the maritime routes from constant harassment will eventually lead to more robust, uninterrupted energy flows. The $4 million interceptors are an upfront capitalization cost. They are an investment in securing trillions of dollars in future uninterrupted global trade that benefits not just the West, but the very developing nations you mentioned.
That is a compelling argument. But have you considered that this capitalization cost assumes the rest of the world is willing to underwrite and accept this unilateral action? Which brings us perfectly to our second major point of contention, diplomatic isolation. We are witnessing the rapid fracturing of traditional alliances and the undeniable rise of a multipolar response that explicitly rejects this intervention.
I think rejects is...
Well, look at Spain. Spain's foreign minister flatly barred the United States from using the Rota and Moran military bases for these strikes. We saw 15 U.S. aircraft forced to depart from southern Spain. That is a NATO ally publicly shutting its doors to American military operations. In the UK, the Prime Minister has distanced Britain from the initial strikes, insisting that the UK must judge its own independent national interest rather than reflexively following military adventurism. And into this diplomatic vacuum steps China. Beijing has called for an immediate end to the attacks, positioning itself not just as a protector of its own energy security, but as the responsible global mediator. This is a profound shift in planetary leadership. The acting powers are moving unilaterally, and the rest of the planet, from Europe to Asia to Africa, is organizing around diplomatic restraint and international law.
I must challenge the premise that the striking nations are uniformly isolated, or that this multipolar response is purely principled. Europe is split, certainly, but it is not uniformly opposed. Look at Germany. The German chancellor has been highly cautious about criticizing the operation, explicitly advocating that now is not the time to publicly chastise allies in the midst of a volatile security operation. The division among European legal scholars and politicians reflects the immense complexity of the situation, not a monolithic rejection.
But the rejection from the global south is quite monolithic.
We have to address why unilateralism became necessary in the first place, though. International law and multilateral consensus utterly failed to contain the regional proxy networks that have destabilized the Middle East for decades. Multilateralism did not prevent the constant harassment of international shipping lanes. When international mechanisms fail to protect global security, decisive action becomes the unavoidable default.
So the default is just abandoning the mechanisms?
The default is enforcing the security those mechanisms failed to provide. As for the diplomatic posturing of nations like China and Russia, it is highly opportunistic. Russia is actively hosting phone calls with European and Arab leaders pretending to be a peacemaker, while clearly using this Middle Eastern crisis to distract from its own ongoing war in Ukraine and the disputes over the Druzhba oil pipeline. They are leveraging this crisis for geopolitical theater to project influence in the global south, not out of a genuine commitment to global peace.
Labeling their response as mere geopolitical theater severely underestimates the structural realignment taking place across the planet right now. When the African Union, ECOWAS, and Latin American leaders call for diplomacy over warfare, they are not acting as pawns in Russian geopolitical theater. They are voicing the genuine alarm of the global south. These nations understand that international law, however flawed, is the only shield they have against the unilateral exercise of hard power. But let us move to the most critical aspect of this debate, where the physical stakes are the absolute highest: long-term security and the nuclear threat. The entire justification for Operation Epic Fury rests on the premise that it will make the world safer from nuclear proliferation.
And the operational data suggests it is systematically doing exactly that. This military operation is deliberately paced, expected to last 4 to 5 weeks, with the executive branch asserting it possesses virtually unlimited munitions to complete the objective. The striking forces are actively remaking the regional map. They are establishing buffer zones in southern Lebanon to protect civilian populations from constant rocket fire. They are systematically dismantling the infrastructure of a regime that has funded instability across the Levant, the Gulf, and beyond.
But they are doing it through sheer force.
By establishing a hard, uncompromising deterrence, the coalition is establishing a permanent precedent. The pursuit of nuclear weapons and the funding of proxy armies to hold the global economy hostage will result in the total dismantling of your military capabilities. This hard deterrence is a painful but absolute prerequisite for long-term security that will benefit the entire planet, essentially removing a sword of Damocles that has hung over global markets and diplomacy for decades.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You cannot bomb a nation into forgetting how to enrich uranium. And you cannot secure a region by proving to its leaders that they are facing an existential threat of annihilation. Look at the stark warning provided by former U.S. diplomat Henry Ensher in our source material. He points out that creating this profound perception of vulnerability will practically guarantee that whatever leadership emerges from this chaos will pursue a nuclear bomb even faster.
Assuming they weren't already.
Historical patterns across the globe dictate that when regimes feel an acute threat of invasion, they view a nuclear arsenal as their absolute only viable guarantee of survival. Instead of eliminating the nuclear threat, this operation has just provided the ultimate undeniable incentive for rapid clandestine nuclear proliferation. Furthermore, the idea of virtually unlimited munitions ignores the stark reality of the global defense supply chain.
Well, this conflict is bleeding defense resources dry globally. Ukrainian leadership has explicitly voiced fears that this new theater of war is creating critical shortages in Patriot ammunition. By diverting these vital air defense systems to the Middle East, the West is effectively handing a strategic victory to Russia in Eastern Europe. The security of the planet is not being enhanced. It is being violently degraded on multiple fronts simultaneously. That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I will readily concede that the global ammunition supply chain is incredibly complex and currently strained. The reallocation of Patriot missile batteries and interceptors does force incredibly difficult strategic choices in places like Eastern Europe. It is a zero-sum game in the short term.
Exactly.
However, excising the immediate metastasizing threat of regional hegemony in the Middle East is the necessary prerequisite for dealing with secondary global conflicts. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed permanently, or if a rogue state successfully deploys a nuclear weapon, the economic and security capacity of the global community to support any ally, whether in Europe or Asia, evaporates entirely. You argue that the strikes incentivize a faster pursuit of a nuclear weapon, but that assumes the regime was not already on that exact trajectory under the cover of diplomatic stalling.
But degrading a capability doesn't erase the knowledge.
The surgical destruction of their missile silos, naval capabilities, and command infrastructure physically removes their capacity to finalize and deliver a nuclear payload in the near to medium term. The strategy relies on degrading the physical capability so thoroughly that the psychological intent becomes entirely irrelevant.
But the physical capability is rarely eradicated entirely. It is simply driven deeper underground, while the human cost inflames the planet. The international community is watching this unfold, and the reaction is visceral. We are seeing protests erupting in South Asia, leading to the closure of Western consulates. We are seeing diplomatic channels in Russia and China denouncing the rampant use of global force. When you create this level of regional trauma, you do not just degrade a military apparatus. You isolate yourself from the very diplomatic frameworks needed to actually inspect, verify, and enforce nuclear compliance in the future. You are trading a difficult, multipolar diplomatic containment strategy for a perpetual, uncontainable regional war that the global South is forced to subsidize through higher energy costs and destabilized markets.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion today, the pain we are witnessing, the economic volatility, the diplomatic friction with nations like Spain, and the protests across the globe are the severe but necessary birth pangs of a newly secured global order. We are transitioning away from a paradigm where bad actors are permitted to hold the global economy hostage through proxy aggression and nuclear brinkmanship. The continuation of vital economic dialogues, like the ones between the US and China, proves that the core of the global system recognizes the necessity of this action and is already adapting to it. Operation Epic Fury is undeniably a painful recalibration, but it replaces a deeply unstable and unsustainable status quo with a hard deterrence that will ultimately safeguard planetary trade, maritime security, and international stability.
And to synthesize my perspective, this operation exemplifies a planetary strategic miscalculation. Unilateral military aggression does not cure instability. It acts as a massive accelerant. It fractures the planetary economy, evidenced by the soaring gas prices in Europe and the halting of critical energy supplies from Qatar that developing nations rely on. It deeply alienates the global South and vital NATO allies who refuse to endorse actions outside the bounds of international consensus. Most dangerously, by confirming the existential fears of the targeted nation, it virtually guarantees an accelerated race toward nuclear armament, all while draining the defense resources desperately needed to maintain stability in other global conflicts. We have traded a flawed but manageable containment for an unpredictable planetary crisis.
What we can both clearly agree on is the profound interconnectedness of our modern geopolitical landscape. We are living in a reality where an interceptor fired in the Middle East instantaneously spikes natural gas futures in Europe, rattles stock portfolios in Asia, diverts critical munitions from Eastern Europe, and provokes immediate, deeply felt political responses from indigenous groups in Ecuador. No nation, no matter how powerful, acts in a vacuum.
Exactly. The sheer density of these ripple effects from the halls of the African Union to the airspace over Dubai and all the way to the trading floors of Beijing and Wall Street demonstrates the immense value of viewing this crisis through multiple diverse global lenses. The analysis simply cannot be confined to the perspectives of one or two capitals alone.
We highly encourage you to continue exploring the intricate details and vast array of international perspectives found in the source payload to form your own conclusions on this unprecedented planetary event. There is much more to unpack there.
Thank you for joining us for this rigorous intellectual exchange.
We will see you next time.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.